Okay. Well, if your week has been anything like mine, you're probably very busy. So I want to go ahead and jump in, and anybody that joins later, we can catch them up on what we've talked about. But thanks for joining today. And really, what I want to make sure we have some time to talk through are some of the updates that GSA released earlier this week. It was not the draft score sheet that we were hoping for. It was not a revised draft RFP, but they did take the time to respond to some of their most frequently asked questions. So we can go through kind of what they said, and I can share my insight or analysis on what I think that means, just based on what they did decide to publish. So without any further ado, obviously this is the Polaris bi-weekly now webinar that we're hosting. I am Rebecca Whalen. I'm from Trident Proposal Management, and just want to talk to you today about things that you could be doing to prep and prepare for this upcoming GWAC. That's going to be a really exciting opportunity, all things IT for small businesses. So of course, just a refresher on reasons why you should outsource your bid decision. Turning the keys over to somebody else to kind of take a look under the hood is going to give you an unbiased look at how prepared your company is, where you really have your strongest experience. If your team is too busy, it is a very busy time of year. We're seeing agencies release solicitation after solicitation, so you may already be bogged down with other bids. And let's not forget that when we finally anticipate this being released, it's going to be later this year, probably right after the fiscal year changeover. So what else would you be doing heading into the holiday seasons in November and December other than preparing for Polaris? So if your team's too busy, then we can certainly help with that. And really what we're encouraging teams to do is decide early whether you want to put the effort and investment into pursuing this, because it's not just about getting the IDIQ award, it's about being able to sustain the contracting business with subsequent task orders and being competitive at that level. So, those are all reasons that, outsourcing this decision can help your team. And we do have our prepackaged support that we're offering now. It's, the details are here on the side, but pretty straightforward in terms of what we're offering. Like I said, really gets you these three things. You get the unbiased look. It relieves your team that's probably tied up doing other things and allows you to decide early if you want to keep investing in this. Okay, so a little bit about Trident Proposal Management. We are a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. It was founded in 2008. We specialize in capture management, proposal support. We provide the full life cycle of support. So if you're looking for opportunities, if you're trying to decide what to respond to, what to put in your pipeline, what customers you need to engage with, how to write compelling proposals, those are all services that we can provide. And you can learn more about that on our website. So yeah, like I said, kind of the four main pillars of our support. You can outsource your proposal management, your capture management, your marketing support, and we also have a training, coaching, and sort of mentoring branch. If your team kind of knows what they're doing and you just need maybe some specific help in certain areas, we have a whole team of we call them our gray team. So very seasoned professionals who have evaluated a number of proposals on the government side, so you kind of get their perspective. We also have people who are contract strategists who've been doing this for decades, literally, so they can help you prepare when it comes to actually having face-to-face conversations with your customers. So whatever flavor of support you need, that's one of our specialties, is that we're able to kind of surge in strategically and help your team out where you need it and in the shape that you need it. So whether that's compliance, writing support, coaching support, just review, call plan development, opportunity vetting, whatever you need, wherever you're at in the life cycle, we can support all those services. Okay, and as I said, my name is Rebecca Whalen. I'm a former Navy surface warfare officer who now does government contracting, and I've got about 7 years of experience specific to DoD proposals as it relates to these kind of things. And I'm a co-author of our Fast Prop system, which you can learn more about on our website. But basically, it's a scalable process to make sure that you are prioritizing your proposal preparation activities correctly, so that you get a compelling response within the 30-day timeline that most proposals come with. So we can talk more about that at the end of the call if you have any questions about Fast Prop. Okay, so again, just a quick overview of Polaris, and I know a couple of people have joined us since we started, so welcome. This is the GSA sponsored GWAC that's coming up. It's probably going to have about a 10-year runtime. The initial period of performance we think is going to be 5 years, but they've indicated that there's going to be options and on-ramps. It's full small business set aside. There's going to be 3 pools. So the women-owned small business, the hub zone, and then just a standard small business pool. It's for everything IT, but just again, I'm sure you've heard us if you joined our other webinars emphasize this. Any of your relevant experience that's going to count needs to be IT centric, related to one of the performance areas as indicated by the draft RFP. They're anticipating 100 to 200 primes, and again, they're still projecting a release date sometime in fall of 2021. It kind of keeps getting, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw this pushed or if the government took a pretty generous interpretation of what fall means. So we can talk a little bit more about that when we get to the updates that GSA released this week. Okay, so with that, real quick overview. They did not release a draft score sheet. We are still waiting on that. They have not released another draft RFP. The one that we got back in January is still the most current version, but there have now been 2 sessions of Q&A that they've decided to share with vendors. And so that's where this is kind of a synopsis of a lot of the questions. So they didn't answer every single question that came in. They kind of grouped them by category. And I didn't even include everything on this list because there were some kind of baseline, I don't want to say JV questions because no question's a bad question, but there were some that just wouldn't affect your strategy. So I really wanted to spend the time today talking through the things that I think carry the most weight and that you need to be paying attention to. So with this first one, the question was basically, I'm sorry, I'm trying to move my window here. What do companies need to be doing now in terms of preparing for the final solicitation? And GSA's answer I thought was pretty interesting. They basically said you need to make sure that your SAM registration is up to date and your cage code registration is complete. And those are 2 very important points, right? That's kind of the very, very fundamental baseline, requirement that you need to meet. But there's actually a lot more that you could be doing. And if you've tuned into our webinars before, you've heard us talk about our checklist that you can download to start evaluating your projects, doing your basic eligibility checks, getting your team in place. These are really, really fundamental activities that the GSA is pointing people towards. So it's kind of interesting that they didn't really elaborate on other activities that you can be doing, but as we know, there's a whole list of them, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. Okay, so question about scope here, and especially there were a lot of questions around teaming, and we already know from the first set of Q&A that the government is really going to take a hard look at how they specify who you can team with and what the relationships need to look like and whose performance, relevant experience you can use and what certifications people need to have and things like that. So I expect that as we go forward, there's going to be even more information that GSA releases on this. But for now, what they've told us is, the question was, can a prime contractor add unnamed subcontractors to the master contract and to the task order? So basically, is the team that you propose the team that you're set with? And the answer is no. So you will actually be able to add subcontractors to your team at the task order level beyond what's identified at the master contract level. Just keep in mind, if you may need to have a specific teaming strategy in order to get on the IDIQ to start with to even be able to compete for the subsequent task orders. So you do have some flexibility, or you will have some flexibility in changing your teammates or adding additional subcontractors as the task orders start to come out. Okay, so this was, I thought, a good question. Are task order solicitations going to be advertised across the awarded pools, or will the agency customers have to select one? And this is the questions come up on our webinars as well. And so what they are saying basically is that the pool that's selected is going to be at the ordering contracting officer's discretion. And so they're still going to have to walk through the steps in terms of figuring out, are complying with FAR 16.505. But it's not going to be, they solicit a certain type of services and it's open to anybody in all 3 pools. They will have to, the ordering contracting officer is going to have to select a pool to compete it in. So they're going to have to do some due diligence before they release those task orders. This was not phrased in the form of a question, so if it was Jeopardy, this person would have been disqualified, but basically they're getting a lot of feedback from industry that they should consider adding additional NICs and PSC codes. And they've kind of said, well, we're not really going to do that. If you have a project that doesn't fall neatly into one of those categories, you might be able to still submit it and get points for it. But basically, there's a big TBD around what the alternative method of verification is going to be for those sources. So the government has reiterated a number of times that they feel pretty strongly that they've got the correct NICS codes identified, and that they know that those are going to cover most of the services that they want. So as of right now, they have not expanded that offering list. And then another question about, who's going to determine the NICS code at the task order level. It's going to go back to the ordering contracting officer. So what I want you to take away from this is that there's going to be a lot of discretion kind of delegated down to the ordering contracting officer level. And why that's important is that because this is an IDIQ, and because you're going to have to get a certain, value, dollar value worth of business on your task orders, the work doesn't stop when you get the IDIQ award. And we've seen this with companies. They've learned this lesson over and over the hard way with GSA contracts. This is not going to be the sort of system where you, like on Seaport, you can sit back passively and just wait for solicitations to be released, and you can snatch them up or bid on what you feel like bidding on or not feel like bidding on. There's going to be a little bit more legwork involved in directing your customers to this IDIQ so that they know how to reach you, so that hopefully by the time the solicitation is released, you've already done some of that capture and engagement and shaping, and tilted things in your favor a little bit, so that again the government customer knows how to come find you through Polaris, and you're not just leaving things up to chance with regards to monitoring solicitations that come out and hoping that they're things that would align to your service categories. So again, just want you to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, that because this discretion is delegated down to the ordering contracting officer's level, you really need to be thinking tactically on the ground who you're going to engage with, what services you're going to sell, and putting your capability statements out there, making sure that the government knows how to get to you. Okay, so moving on, a couple other questions just as it relates to submitting a proposal for Polaris. So the question from industry was, can a company propose on more than one small business socioeconomic pool? And the government said yes. You can propose on any pool that you're eligible for, but you must, and there's a follow-up question about this, you have to indicate very clearly in your proposal which pool you are applying for. So it's not like they're going to receive your proposal and be like, oh, they put this in the small business pool, but they're a woman-owned small business, so let's go ahead and count them for both. If you didn't indicate that you want to be considered for the woman-owned small business pool, and you've only applied under the small business pool, then you're not going to, like I said, they're not going to do that legwork for you and decide to evaluate you against the competition in the woman-owned small business pool. So you need to be very, very deliberate in what you're submitting and applying for. And the good news is that you don't have to write separate proposals for each of the pools, but there may be some additional submission requirements if you are submitting under multiple pools. And we expect that those details are going to be included either in the next version of the draft RFP, but certainly in the final RFP release. So they are planning to give vendors very specific instructions about how to bid on multiple pools and what's going to be required to distinguish between the three. So like we talked about, nobody is going to be automatically considered for the pools that they qualify for. You have to tell the government what you'd like to apply for. And there's not going to be a percentage of orders reserved for the pools. So I think we're going to see a little bit more information again about pools and how people use them, and what they expect the distribution to be as we go forward. Because right now, all they've said is that they anticipate 60 to 100 awardees per pool. But we don't necessarily have good insight into what competition at the task order level is going to look like once they award the IDIQ. Okay, another good question. Can task order requirements include further set-asides within the small business pool? So if you are on the small business pool and you also happen to be a service-disabled veteran-owned small business, will there be any set-asides coming out under that pool to account for all the other socioeconomic categories that exist? And this is kind of an interesting answer. The government says no. So really, if you're a small business of any variety, you're qualified for that. They're not worried about maintaining any percentages or quotas within that small business pool. If you're a woman-owned small business pool, like that's where the woman-owned small business set-asides are going to be. and same thing for HubZone. So it's important to note that if you think that within the small business pool you're going to have a specific advantage because maybe you are a better known small business or service disabled better known small business, not the case. Okay, so questions around relevant experience. Want to spend a little bit of time here. So please confirm that prime offerers are not limited to only using relevant experience references from subcontractors with whom they have previously performed on a contractor order. If you've been through the draft RFP, you'll remember that there's a risk assessment section that says basically whoever you're proposing on your team is fine as long as everybody meets the eligibility requirements, but the government will give special consideration to those teammates that you've worked with before in the same type of relationship. So if you have a long-standing relationship with another business out there, and you guys are hitting it out of the park on a contract or a task order delivery today, and you want to propose with that person, that's a really good choice for you to make. But if you find a new teammate because they've got complementary skills, you find that they fill a gap that you have, you're not limited to only selecting past performance where you might have performed before, right? Because obviously if you don't have that, you would be at a disadvantage. So when it comes to selecting your projects, anything from right now, the way that the instructions are, anything from the prime or the teammates can be submitted to fill the primary and emerging technology categories. But again, when they're evaluating the relationships that you have from a risk perspective, you will get special consideration, and they haven't defined what that means. So we don't know, how many extra points or how much lower of a risk score that's going to be, but we know that you will get special consideration if you are proposing with a team that you've worked with before. Okay, so kind of a generic question. Can you share any information on whether women-owned small business joint ventures can participate? And the government said, well, yes, of course, we encourage you to participate. And I think what's interesting about this is not so much that they're asking about a specific type of joint venture, but I think it just reaffirms that they are going to be encouraging joint venture relationships writ large. So I know sometimes there's some back and forth about what that's going to look like on these larger IDIQs or the GWACs, but right now, all indications from GSA are that Polaris is going to be wide open for joint ventures. And those, remember, with a joint venture, you can either propose the relevant experience of the large business or the small business. So right now, both of those are weighted equally, which can be really beneficial if you're in that type of relationship. Okay. Another question that came up, and a little bit of nuance here, was, are contractor teaming arrangements in accordance with FAR subpart 9.6 allowed? So basically, can I bid solo on one track, like in the women-owned small business pool, and as a joint venture or CTA in another track, so like under HubZone? And the answer from the government is yes, you can bid with different relationships in different pools, as long as you're doing so as different legal entities. So we actually do have a contracting specialist on our team, Brandon Haas. If you have questions about how to set that up, we'd be happy to talk to you offline. Or if you have questions, we get a lot from the JVs. And so I just wanted to mention that we do have that expertise, but also we're going to want to stay tuned to any updates on Polaris because we know that this is an area that they've been getting a lot of questions about. So I don't necessarily know that the guidance is going to change, but I think they're going to give more specifics and just define the requirements a little bit more as we go. So we're going to want to keep a close eye on that to make sure that everybody is compliant with all of the requirements that they set forth. Okay, so next question was, can a small business propose via a joint venture on other pools, such as women-owned small business? And again, yes, they're going to provide more teaming information and instructions on how to do this, so you can show up in more than one proposal. Now, the big caveat here, and I think there's a subsequent question that kind of is a follow-up to this, is that you cannot use the same relevant experience project on different proposals. So that's what this next question is can a company subcontract with more than one prime? So you can be on multiple teams, right? If you want to hedge your bets and find your best three options, you could do that if you have a broad portfolio of experience to put forth. But if you've got, and let's just use this as a for instance, if you've got a task order where you are providing the right level of IT support to the Department of Labor, you can only give that relevant experience project to one teammate. You cannot share that across all of your primes that are sponsoring your bid here. And the important thing to keep in mind there is that projects used in more than one proposal in a given pool are going to be removed from all the proposals and will not be evaluated. So if your prime thought that they were going to get points for your project and you've given that project to someone else, it's not going to count. Okay, and then you may also recall from reading the draft RFP that there's, I think it's volume 4, which relates to kind of certifications, and this is where they've got CMMC, they've got DCAA, ISO 9000, any additional company certifications and audits, and they're all listed as optional right now. But we know that if you do have, for example, a cost compliant system that's been audited, like you're going to get more points for that. If you have a facility clearance, you're going to get additional points for that. So there've been a lot of questions around CMMC because if you do anything in the DoD realm, you're aware that this is kind of rolling out, and it's I don't want to call it the next big thing, but this is going to be a baseline requirement for all DoD contractors in the future. And so there's a lot of groundwork being laid right now to get people set up for these certifications in terms of what the requirements are, what the criteria are for safeguarding information and things like that. So the question was, can you share any information that you have on CMMC and the requirements for Polaris? And they basically said people need to start preparing for this. So as of right now, with the draft RFP, the CMMC cert is optional. But even in the draft RFP, they say, hey, this could change for future on-ramps. And depending on how delayed the final solicitation is, we could see this turn into a requirement. So I think it's unlikely to be for the first round, but who knows with government acquisition timelines, right? So basically, the GSA's advice is to start reading into this, start looking to see if you can get accredited, and make sure that you're aware of developing requirements, because eventually, if the DoD wants to reach you through Polaris, you're probably going to have this certification, and they're going to have some system for bringing all the contractors up to this standard. Okay, any questions? I know that was a lot of me talking. Any questions on the new content? And you can also use the chat. I am monitoring that as we go along here. And I'll give you just a couple minutes to think about that, just in case there are any questions. I will mention, so I have subscribed to the Small Business Community of Interest on GSA's webpage, and it's supposed to send out automated emails every time they release an update. And to date, I have not received one email yet. So please do subscribe to our webinars and our newsletters. We will get that information out, even if the electrons that are supposed to come from GSA get lost in the mail somewhere. So we are monitoring these sites pretty frequently, and I think especially as the summer draws to a close, we are certainly keeping a close eye out for that draft score sheet that they have promised and the updated draft RFP. So just wanted to mention that in case if you weren't aware that GSA had released an update, it may be that you thought you were subscribed, or you are subscribed and the system's just not working properly. So we've got feelers out looking in multiple directions to make sure that anything Polaris related gets caught in our net. So we're doing that legwork for you so that you don't have to. Okay. We talked through this 2 weeks ago, and again, kind of had a small group. So if you were on the call for that, then you're going to know the answers to this quiz, so don't spoil it for everybody else. With points-based RFPs, there's a couple nuances that you need to keep in mind, and the biggest is probably that you have to submit proof of anything that you claim, and it's not the standard proposal response, right? Like, you're not writing 15-page technical approaches, you're not submitting your management plan, you're not describing how you would conduct transition to go from vendor to vendor. What you're having to do is substantiate that you have performed work that's like what they are soliciting for. And you're not even doing that within a past performance narrative. What you have to do is say, here's the statement of work from the contract that I'm claiming points for, And here are the sections that you should read because these substantiate what I'm saying. So you're having to use documents that you didn't author and that you really can't modify to prove that you should be awarded the points that you think you should. And this matters, right? Because people don't normally, well, and maybe I shouldn't, make such a broad brush statement, but people a lot of times do not read their contract documentation with that level of scrutiny, because if you're not used to having to apply it to meet a certain standard of evidence, then you take a different lens when you look at what the content is and what's included or not included or how things are phrased. And we'll get into that a little bit more with some of the examples that I have. So we have a blog post about this on our website, all about like, how do you know if the evidence that you think you can use actually qualifies? And so step one is to say, okay, well, is it on the list of approved documentation that the government has asked for? Because they gave us a nice little list in the RFP that says, or sorry, in the draft RFP, it says, look, we're going to be looking at these documents to verify the things that you're claiming. So for things like period of performance, project value, type of contract, all that's going to come from the FPDS record. And so there is going to be a project template that you have to submit for every experience. They've not given us a draft of this yet, but basically for anything that FPDS doesn't cover, you're going to have to fill out this project template and submit additional documents to substantiate what you're saying. And the project template, here's something else to keep in mind, is going to have to be signed by the contracting officer, and only in very limited circumstances will they permit a signature from the contracting officer's representative. But basically, you're going to have to turn it into the government and say, please attest and verify that everything I've claimed here is, correct and factual to the best of your knowledge. And so there's going to be a little bit of a process involved with that. So, while we're on this slide, I also want to mention that in terms of those preparatory activities, you should be checking your records right now for all of the projects that you intend to submit. So, go beyond SAM, go beyond cage code registration. Those are all really important. But if you want to make good use of your time now, pull the SOW, pull the statement of work from the contract, not from the solicitation that you responded to, but from the actual contract that you were awarded, and start looking at how things are phrased and what's actually spelled out in there versus, what you just know based on, your familiarity with the work. Okay, so again, there's the FPDS report right now is going to be the ground truth. And as you probably know, FPDS is not really getting updated anymore. It's really a historical document. So instead of, if there are errors there, you'll be able to correct those on the project template rather than having to file a record correction. But this is going to be where the government goes to verify. They're going to look backwards and say, okay, well, what does the system say? And I just want to foot stomp this, because if you are trying to establish things like period of performance, if your contract has been through a number of mods that have extended the period of performance, you're going to have to think through, you're going to have to look basically maybe at the very first entry and the most recent entry to make sure that no data changed that shouldn't have changed every time a modification was issued, because that can happen in records. So I'm just planting the seed of things that can go wrong and headaches that you could encounter so that you can get ahead of those and fix them now. Okay, so you're going to want to pull your original contract award documentation, the statement of work, or if just depending on how your contract was issued, you might need the Section B, the price list, the cleanse, things like that. Okay, so again, going back to the fundamental question of, what does actual evidence that you can use look like? Does it tie to the right contract? And this sounds really obvious, but is the correct and correlating contract number for your primary project that you're submitting, is that listed on every piece of additional documentation or evidence that you're submitting to substantiate your points? Because every piece of evidence has to link back to the source project. You can't just hand them the FPDS record and a statement of work or PWS that doesn't have that contract number on it. And by the way, if you got issued your statement of work or your PWS as an attachment, or if it was amended or modified at some point over the course of the contract, mistakes happen. So sometimes people don't put the right contract number in the header and footer, or they put it on the title page, but on no other pages. So you're going to have to submit the entire document to show that this does indeed link back to the contract that you're referencing. And the same thing is true with things like teaming agreements. If you are trying to claim additional points for having multiple teammates on a contract, that teaming agreement needs to say that the teaming agreement was established for the performance of a specific contract. And by the way, if you're the teammate in question that's taking credit for the work that you did on that project in a performance area, your statement of work that you have has to indicate what you were doing, and that the text there has to align to the primary project areas as well. So this is something that is, it can be very binary, and that means it can be very easy, right? Like an easy yes, something that's clear in text, doesn't require additional thought. But where we see vendors struggle, or where we see the bidders struggle, is that they think they've got a piece of good evidence, and then, you know, as they start to peel the onions of the layer, they realize, no, there's no linkage here, or somebody mistyped the contract number, or it didn't transfer to the subsequent pages, or we used a copy and paste from another teaming agreement and we didn't update the teammate's name. These things happen. So this is why we're encouraging you to use the time now to go through everything. And this speaks to the second point, you know, is your documentation accurate and complete? Does it list the right type of contract? Does it, you know, and by that I mean, you know, was it cost plus fixed fee? Was it time and materials? There's different points awarded based on the contract type. So are all of the details correct? And if you're curious about which areas to look at, we'll talk about that when we get to our checklist that we've developed. Okay, so let's assume that your evidence tracks appropriately. It's got the right reference numbers on it, right? It lists the right contract. Does it pass the standard of evidence test? So could any evaluator, without you in the room, read what you've submitted and interpret it exactly the same way that you did in selecting it? You know, is it clear and definitive? Or do you have to be there to explain, like, well, when they said this in the statement of work, what they really meant was something else? You're not going to have the narrative room to explain that. You're going to be giving the government a copy of your statement of work. You're going to put a sticky note in it in Adobe, and you're going to tell them why you're claiming points for that. But you know, you're not going to have 5 paragraphs worth of explanation. It's going to be a pretty shorthand annotation in most cases. So make sure that your statement of work, because this is, and I'm emphasizing that because this is where we anticipate the most problems. So make sure that your statement of work actually substantiates your claim and says the words that you need it to say. Okay, so with that, these are just some examples for you. So let's say you want to claim additional points because your contract included an OCONUS place of performance. And if you've read the draft RFP, you know that TDY does not count, right? So it can't be in a temporary way. It needs to be for a sustained period of time. 30 days is the norm for what they establish as, you know, sustained performance in a place. So reading through this, and this is where we get some audience interaction here. Do you think that this would be enough to give you points, to have the points awarded to you for OCONUS place of performance? This is an excerpt from just a random statement of work that we found. You can pop your answer in the chat, or you can come off of mute and let me know what you think. Any thoughts? Well, I will cut through the suspense, and maybe you're still reading the slide, but we start off kind of strong, right? We're talking about place performance and tasks will be performed here and there, but then we get down to this list of additional locations. And again, at first glance, this is promising because it lists Yokohama, Japan, Naples, Italy. You know, those are places that are OCONUS. However, we have 2 problems. One is it says these tasks may require travel, so it does not say that performance shall include these locations. And then the duration is also temporary, just based on what's phrased here. So this alone from the statement of work would not be enough to justify points for OCONUS performance. Any questions about that? And I have some more examples so that you can see it in another context. So what about this paragraph? Services shall be performed at the Joint Expeditionary Base headquarters facility, and then they list, Connecticut, Virginia, and such ports where in-serve inspections and trials are held to include, but not limited to, San Diego, Mayport, Pascagoula, Norfolk, Port Harbor, Everett, Sasebo, Yokosuka, Bahrain, Guam, Groton, Kings Bay. Would this count for OCONUS points? Any thoughts from the team? So kind of similar to the previous slide that we had, right? At first glance, this looks promising because it lists some clear OCONUS places of performance, and we have some stronger language around services, shall be performed here, not may, not could. It does say shall. However, when you submit documentation to the government, you're not going to submit one little paragraph, you're going to submit an entire page. And what's immediately preceding this content is a travel chart that shows the approximate duration of the stay in each of these places. So you can see from this that the number of days spent OCONUS collectively is not very much. So this would not meet the threshold of a performance in a sustained fashion that goes beyond TDY requirements. So did they travel OCONUS? Yes. Was it a primary place performance? No. So again, like I said, at first glance, it looks kind of promising, but just based on the standard of evidence that we have to meet, this alone would not be enough to substantiate. And one kind of additional thought there, even if this table said 60 days in Guam or 60 days in Sasebo, unless we could show that it was done all together and not 6 days here, home for 3 weeks, another 6 days, home for 3 weeks, you still wouldn't get credit. So this is where we have to start thinking through, like, okay, what do we have that would establish this as place performance? Maybe it's the DD 254. Maybe it's a monthly status report, for May, June, and July that shows that there's somebody on site for that period of time. Maybe it's a staffing report that's part of our monthly status report. It's going to vary from contract to contract, but this is the level of scrutiny you need to be looking at your evidence with so that you don't get disqualified and miss out on easy points. I say easy points, but I know that they're not easy to come by. Okay, and last chance here. So again, from a different statement of work, primary place performance will be at Camp Foster, personnel will be required, blah, blah, blah. Does this meet the standard of evidence for OCONUS performance? The answer here is yes. So finally, we have something that's very cut and dry, short and sweet, that says your primary place performance is at an OCONUS location. So this, if you remember from the previous two examples, they said shall, they had some squishy language in there. This is definitive, and most likely the reported primary place performance in FPDS would also be Okinawa. But keep in mind, sometimes people don't make those data entries correct, so they may go off of the contracting organization's location. So if this wasn't contracted by 3MEF is probably who did this contract out in Okinawa. If it wasn't their contracting organization, it was handled by somebody stateside, they might put that central location. So it might say San Diego or something like that. So you definitely want to check those records and make sure that they say what you think they say. Okay, so again, in the mindset of getting ready now and using this time, going beyond your SAM registration, going beyond your cage code verification, things you need to be doing right now is confirming your eligibility to bid on this contract, either as a prime or as a sub. Getting your projects together that you want to use for relevant experience. On other webinars, we've talked about how this could be 70 to 90% of your total score is going to come from past performance and relevant experience. That's a huge number of points. So making sure that you select the right projects is going to be pretty critical. Looking at a gap analysis, which coverage or which areas does your experience cover? Where do you have gaps? Where do you maybe need to start looking at a teammate to fill those gaps? If you have a lot of gaps, should you be the prime? Looking forward to, task order competition, do you have the infrastructure in place at your company to manage a GSA contract? Are you going to have the right level of interaction? Do you have a senior program manager that's going to be able to liaise with the government? Who do you have that's going to be tracking down opportunities, engaging with customers, doing the business development side of things, and driving business to this contract vehicle? Those are all questions that you should be thinking through now. Look through your teaming options. Maybe if you're not the right prime, maybe you can be a really good value-added teammate for somebody, especially if you have capabilities in the emerging technology areas where a lot of people don't necessarily have a huge portfolio of past performance yet. And then gather and review your records. Make sure you're digging through that evidence. Apply this standard of evidence that we just talked about to make sure that everything you think you can submit, you're actually going to be able to. Because what's going to happen is that we're going to have let's just say we get a 60-day response window for Polaris. The vendor questions that come into the government, people are going to ask really specific questions about what kind of evidence counts, and it's going to put the government in the position of saying, yes, you can use that, or no, you can't, or maybe. And so you might start off with something that you think is a qualified piece of evidence, like a DD-254, and then because somebody asks, a question, the government thinks about it a little harder, and they go, actually, no, you can't use a DD-254 to substantiate place performance. You need to find something else. And so all of a sudden, you're back on the hunt for other things. So if you do your homework now, if you know where things are documented and you know how they're documented, you're going to save yourself some of the headaches as pieces of evidence become disqualified or less desirable than others, just as the Q&A period goes on. So you take nothing else away from this webinar today. The proper prior planning is going to prevent your poor Polaris performance. So, we have the 7 Ps in this case, but take advantage of this time now while we're still waiting on the final versions of everything. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so I mentioned these a little bit earlier in the presentation, but we do on our website have a couple checklists for you that are completely free to download, and these are taken directly from the draft RFP. They're just put in a more user-friendly format, and they're designed to walk you through the eligibility criteria for you as a company, and then they're designed to walk you through your projects to see what you have, off the shelf today and what you need to go find. So it's really, these are designed to help you make a go/no decision with regards to Polaris. So are you eligible? Are you not eligible? Do you have things to fix to become eligible? Anything that you see in these checklists on red is a potentially disqualifying factor that you're going to need to take a look at. And again, we tried to make these pretty user-friendly. If you run into a showstopper, if you get to a point on the checklist and you mark something no and it's a red box, don't lose hope that there may be something that we can do to help you, whether it's looking at certification, finding a qualified teammate, reviewing your experience to see if it fits. There will be some TBDs, right, because we're working off of a draft, and so things like dollar thresholds may change, but we're committed to keeping these checklists updated as we get updates from the government. So again, these are built directly from the draft RFP, and they're the best thing we have right now in terms of just walking you through in a very user-friendly way so that you can get a sense of if you have any business pursuing this business. Because it's just because you can doesn't mean that you should, right? That's the whole trick of IDIQs, and especially when they come with minimum contracting thresholds. So we want you to get set up for long-term success on Polaris and not just have the 50-meter target of success being defined as getting an IDIQ award. It's got to go beyond that. Okay, so these are just some zoomed in examples. And again, these are available on our website. If you go to tridentproposals.com, we've got a whole GSA Polaris tab. You can also check out our blog posts. You know, every couple of weeks we've been putting out some more information, just trying to keep them, you know, short reads that get you up to speed and or keep you fresh on this content and reiterating what you can do now to really get organized. Okay, and so like I mentioned, we've got checklists for the relevant experience projects. So you can look at a contract and evaluate it against the criteria, run it through the top to bottom score, take account of what verification documents you have, what you might need to go find, and then same thing for emerging technology areas. Okay, and Nelson's not on today, but I will kind of run through his section. So at this point, you have a couple options with regards to what you can do, right? You can decide that Polaris is not the right contract for you in any form or fashion, and you can no bid. If you want to bid alone, we can help you do that. If you're one of those small businesses that has a great portfolio of past performance and you can hit every performance area, then that's great. We can help you get all your documentation ready. If you are probably like most small businesses and you've got some gaps, we can help you build a team, or we can help you find a team to join. So these are services that we're offering right now. And because this question comes up a lot, people ask us, you know, how many of the performance areas do I need to cover? And the government has not listed a minimum number of areas, but our best advice is that you or your team, you know, the collection of your experience needs to cover as many of those performance areas as possible. Because on a points-based RFP, there's not it's not like a minimum points qualification criteria. So it's not like Seaport NextGen, where basically if you could prove you had previous experience with the Navy, you were determined an eligible offerer and you got a contract award. With Polaris, what they're going to do with these points-based RFPs, or these scorecard RFPs, is they're going to total up how many points every bidder got, right? Everybody's going to have a score, and they're going to look at the top 100 scorers, and those are going to be the ones that get the contract award. So every point counts and try and get you into that top tier of competitors. Okay, so just want to mention here, we do have an established GWAC process. So if you need help managing your PMO after contract award, that's something that we can help with as well. Like I said, we've got full lifecycle support when it comes to capture and proposals. We got experts with all kinds of backgrounds. We're just zooming here. Okay, and like we talked about, if you weren't here for the very first part of the call, the reasons to outsource this bid decision is that we are going to give you an unbiased look based on criteria, not based on, you know, how much you're hoping to get on Polaris, but we can take a look at what your actual performance history is and tell you if you're a credible bidder or not. If your team is very busy, you know, the signs that we are getting from GSA is that maybe in October we'll have a final RFP. So as we head into the holidays with October and November and December, people have other things that they're going to want to be focused on. And maybe you just need a little bit more capacity on your team. We can surge in a strategic way and help build that capacity for you. And really, again, we cannot stress this enough. You want to decide early if you're going to spend time and money and effort pursuing this. Because again, it's not just about getting the IDIQ award, it's about positioning your company and your team for long-term success. Because otherwise, every time you hear the word Polaris, you're gonna shudder, and we don't want you to have that experience. So, you know, taking the appropriate steps now to kind of outsource and think through the long-term impacts of this, or what we're encouraging people to do. And so, if you need help with these things, we do have a free package offer. You have to include this as part of the webinar, right? But it's pretty low pain for you guys. If you're not sure where to start, if you're not sure if you're eligible, if you're not sure if your experience is strong enough, we can work with you to evaluate that. And at the end, you get a report that says, here's where we think you're strong, here's where we think you've got some vulnerabilities, or here are the things that you need to fix in order to be eligible. So we're happy to do that. Okay, so I put in a plug a couple times for our website. You can find out more there. It's www.tridentproposals.com. Like I said, we've got blog posts, we've got checklists. You can learn more about our team and the other services that we provide. And you can also just reach out to us if you have any kind of follow-up questions and want to learn more either about Polaris or responding to proposals in general. Okay, so these are our backup slides on joint ventures. I've done a lot of talking today, so we're not going to delve into that. But I will stay on the line for a little while if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining today, and we look forward to hearing from you.